Morning, Paul.
Thanks, Hermione, and welcome back to the program. Greg Hunt. Good morning, Mr. Hunt.
Good morning, Paul.
Well, on the slipper developments, the opposition is calling for the Speaker to step aside. Whatever happened to the presumption of innocence?
Well, there is a presumption of innocence, but these are deeply serious allegations. Allegations of sexual harassment during the course of his office as Speaker. Allegations of procuring a staff member for improper purposes during the course of his term as Speaker, and allegations of potentially criminal fraud. So the standard which this government has set in terms of the military, with the Commodore of ADFA, the Defence Force Academy, is that where there are serious allegations with a foundation, then somebody should step aside. At the moment, the Prime Minister says there's one rule for the military, but a different rule for Gillard's pet.
In this case, of course, it's not within the Prime Minister's power to force Mr. Slipper to step aside. Only a vote of the Parliament can do that?
Of course it's within the Prime Minister's power. She knows that, we know that, the Australian people know that. All she has to do is withdraw confidence. Can you imagine the Speaker of Australia introducing and standing next to the German Chancellor, the Secretary-General of the United Nations, the President of China? This is Australia's face, and the face of the people and the Parliament. And whilst these allegations, which are deeply serious, are unresolved, the Speaker should stand aside, and if Mr. Slipper will not stand aside, the Prime Minister should finally exercise some decency and stand him aside.
I'm advised this morning that the only mechanism that could get the Speaker to stand aside would be a dissent from his ruling. Are you suggesting the Prime Minister should engineer a way in which a ruling could be dissented from?
Well, the simple thing that the Prime Minister could do is say to the Speaker that we will not provide confidence to your role, and she should do it now, and then the Speaker will have no choice.
If she doesn't do it, will the opposition step in?
We'll reserve our position. But right now, at this moment, at this time, it is within the Prime Minister's gift, and it is certainly the Prime Minister's responsibility to stand up and to stand for standards in this Parliament. Let's be clear. They've set one rule for the military. Even Craig Thompson stood aside as chair of the House Economics Committee. There is no doubt and no question that the Prime Minister should act. She should do the right thing, the decent thing, and to ensure that the Speaker steps aside and that we have an election at the earliest possible time, because Australians demand clean and stable government.
So you're calling for an election sooner rather than later?
It is absolutely time for an election. The Australian people are sick and tired of a government built on rotten foundations.
If your wishes came true and there was an election within the next 3 to 6 months, there'd have to be another election within 18 months for the Senate, because only the House of Representatives at this time could go out.
Right now, this government is addled to the core. It's neither competent...
So you're calling for 2 elections is what I'm getting at?
No, we want an election at the earliest possible time. In the meantime, the Prime Minister should stand the Speaker aside if he will not do the right thing.
Time for a break. When we return with the .com panel, we ask, can the Coalition afford to repeal the carbon tax? And the gang on the project kept tabs on Tony Abbott's anti-carbon tax crusade.
These days, most workplaces contain traces of Tony Abbott because he's all over the country. Today he was in Melbourne and he was looking at. Actually, just check him out. I love him.
Mark's wife actually works here as well.
Are you kidding, eh? Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Great, okay.
Yeah, so we met together here.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Nice when work got a bit of spice in it.
That's isn't it? Yeah. Is it? Oh, good on you, buddy.
Buckle up for the ultimate game of cat and mouse.
Chair works.
I like standing.
What else do you like, Agent Gibbs?
New NCIS.
Good luck.
8:40 Tuesday on 10.
They say all good things come to an end, but do they really? Transact now has a mobile plan with endless talk, endless text, endless voicemail, and 500 megabytes of data, all within Australia. The endless mobile plan from Transact. for just $39 on a month-to-month contract. So why wait? Go endless now. Buy online at transact.com.au or talk to us on 133061.
It's Curtain Wonderland's massive catalogue sale. Save up to 50% on blockout ready-made curtains, quilt cover sets, eyelet curtains, pole sets and ready-made blinds. Save up to 50% during Curtain Wonderland's massive catalogue sale on now.
NIB has health cover designed for young families with no hospital access for kids under 21 and up to 75% back on extras like dental. Call 13 14 63 today. It's worth it.
Stay cool and dry with the King G-Work Cool 2 range. Made with breathable fabric and extra ventilation, it's the coolest work gear under the sun. It's just another way Protector All Safe is looking after you.
Remember these faces. These are the faces of the Aussies in Formula One. Now, watch them take on the rest of the world. Swiss presents Formula One Bahrain. See the race tonight, live on 10 Super Sunday.
You're on Meet the Press with Opposition Climate Change spokesman Greg Hunt, and welcome to the panel Malcolm Farr from news.com.au and Sophie Black from crikey.com.au. Very dotty this morning. Well, on Wednesday, Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey laid down some tough markers for low-taxing, small-spending government.
So, obviously, the age of entitlement is coming to an end because governments are running out of money, and the debt is now crippling governments. Welfare represents around a third of the entire Australian federal budget. It is an enormous cost burden.
So, where does this leave Tony Abbott's message that he can scrap the carbon tax but keep the pension rises, the family tax benefits and other benefits it would pay for?
They shouldn't assume that all of the goodies, in inverted commas, that are paid for by the carbon tax will all go.
Greg Hunt, how can you afford to rescind this carbon tax and still pay for all these promises?
Well, we will have tax cuts without a carbon tax, and the reason is very simple. It's about implementing the same practices we had when we were in government. What you've seen is 10 out of 12 surpluses from the previous coalition government and 9 out of 9 deficits from the current and immediate past Labor government. There are two different cultures here. Savings on one hand, expenditure on the other. Let me give you an example. In the next few weeks, $1 billion in cash will be given to the biggest brown coal electricity producers in Australia. That's because the carbon tax is such a mess, they're taxing and then they're giving $1 billion of money to the biggest electricity brown coal producers in Australia.
But we're still so sketchy on details here. We're talking about pulling out $27 billion worth of revenue that the carbon tax could generate, and we're still not any clearer on how you're going to cost these promises.
Well, we're potentially 2 budgets away from a federal election. We would like it, obviously, as early as possible. We think the Australian people want clean and stable government now. But there are potentially 2 budgets, so you can only base your final projections on the available figures. But let's be clear, we have been going through line by line, program by program, a path and a process of identifying savings which can be made. In my own portfolio, for example, we would merge the 2 departments of climate and environment with real and genuine savings. That's upfront and clear. We've seen the waste of the home insulation program, the green loans program, the Green Start program. There has been manifest waste across a variety of fronts, and we're upfront about the sorts of savings we'd make.
Okay, but you must at least be able to make the broad commitment that once you get rid of carbon pricing, electricity prices will come down. Can you say that?
Well, there should be no excuse, and we will make sure there's no excuse.
Can you say that? Can you say they will come down?
There should be no excuse for the retailers failing to pass on the reduction as a result of the carbon tax being removed, and we will make sure that the ACCC has a mandate, so the amount of the carbon tax which is added to the electricity bill should come straight off it.
So this government has an excuse as well. Then that electricity prices going up outside its ken. I'm not talking about the carbon pricing situation.
Well, this government has lots of excuses. What we've seen, according to the latest...
Valid ones.
What we've seen, according to the latest figure, is that electricity prices have gone up by, according to KPMG, in this city alone of Melbourne, 74% over a 5-year period on the retail front. On top of that, adding a carbon tax makes no sense. What we're saying is we will remove the carbon tax and that amount will come off the electricity bill.
How will your direct action plan go to addressing these problems of ageing infrastructure, which are already contributing largely to these electricity price increases?
Well, the best thing that you can do to ensure that we have a modern electricity system is to try to reduce the costs within that system, so as what can occur is there can be investment, there can be relatively lower prices. But if you are adding massive prices, then what we're seeing in Victoria, as well as in other states, is that there's an impairment of the value and the assets of the producers. Therefore, they're not able to invest, and therefore we have a system which is frozen.
Well, the government, of course, is pushing ahead with the carbon tax. A key component is the Clean Energy Finance Corporation that was unveiled in some detail on Tuesday. Now, the business leader, Gillian Broadbent, rejected you calling it a slush fund. Here she is.
We're trying to select projects that are viable and that can repay the capital and service the debt, but it's more a matter of creating real options for the Australian economy and energy generation rather than picking winners.
Mr. Hunt, Gillian Broadbent's CV, it's quite spectacular, isn't it? Reserve Bank board member since '98, on the board of a major retailer. Is she the sort of woman who would come up with and endorse a slush fund?
Look, I accept and have great respect for individuals who put themselves forward. Our issue is with the government, and the terms of reference that the government have given the Clean Energy Finance Corporation are such that not even Warren Buffett could make it work. And the way to think of it is this. They've said we're going to borrow $10 billion in the taxpayer's name to invest in speculative ventures which the private sector has rejected. So these are the projects that the private sector has rejected as unproven, unviable or unlikely ever to be successful.
How are the direct action incentive schemes any different to that, though?
Well, completely different, because what we're doing is looking for the lowest cost means of reducing emissions. The government is finding
it's $10 billion worth of taxpayers' funds, though, isn't it?
Well, we are talking about a situation in the first year of 300 million, then 500 million, then 750 million over not just the first, but the first 3 years. The government is looking at $2 billion next year, $2 billion the year after, and $2 billion on and on for the first 5 years. And they are finding the least economic projects, the least successful projects, because the market won't invest in them. And you only need to look at the United States. The collapse of Solyndra, the collapse of ENA1, of the Beacon Energy project, and just recently, Solar Trust of America with a $2 billion Energy Department loan guarantee using a very similar system to the one which the government has just adopted here.
Does the federal government have a right to spend a fair bit of dough explaining carbon pricing to the punters?
They've already spent $30 million. That includes giving $93,000 to the ACTU. They're just about to spend $10 million more, according to the Auditor General, including $670,000 for what's described in this bit of paper which has just been released, which was previously secret, for ad hoc discretionary grants to favoured friends over the next 10 weeks. So there's a very simple message. The government should axe the $10 million of taxpayer funding for partisan political advertising for the carbon tax today.
These are grants to people, helping them adjust to carbon pricing, or what?
No, these are grants to favoured friends, such as the ACTU, $670,000 to be shovelled out the door in the next 10 weeks, and then there's another $10 million of taxpayer funding for public advertising to be paid for by mums and dads who are watching this program. So the Prime Minister should axe it right now.
So they shouldn't follow the example of the Howard government after the GST or after the work choices?
This is our watch and our time right now, and I'm telling you of the standards that we're setting. This is partisan political advertising.
And will follow.
And we will. We've committed to saving $50 million on advertising. These ads should be axed and ruled out today.
Thank you very much for being with us today.
It's a pleasure.
Coming up, leading economist